A couple in the forest is declaring their love for each other, but the sweet moment is interrupted by the promotion of a phone. This is a commercial directed by Dan, who used to be a promising filmmaker. Unfortunately, he only got to direct one movie 8 years ago and has been stuck with commercials since then. During his break, Dan tells random coworkers that he'll go on a vacation with his wife to the family cabin on the weekend. He puts extra emphasis on the fact that his wife will go on a hike and how dangerous it is. After work, Dan gets in his car and makes a mysterious call to confirm that the plan is still on. On the passenger seat, there's a bag with a hacksaw, duct tape, and rope. Before going home, Dan visits his father Michael at the nursing home and tells him about his trip too, once again putting emphasis on how dangerous it is. On TV, there's a new report about 2 convicted killers who just escaped prison. At home, Dan hides his bag of tools in the trunk under a blanket. His neighbor Rachel sees him and wishes him happy hunting, which he finds odd. Then his wife Lisa joins him in the car and Dan announces very loudly that they're going hiking. Their relationship is tense and they're clearly annoyed by each other. During the trip, Dan and Lisa keep throwing passive-aggressive comments and changing the music. Lisa is an aspiring actress, so she pulls out a play script to read and to avoid talking to her husband. When she insults the director of the play, Dan thinks it's an indirect insult toward him and a new argument ensues. Eventually Lisa asks Dan to at least pretend to be happy so they can relax. When they finally arrive at the cabin, Lisa immediately starts drinking wine while Dan puts away their groceries. Then he goes to the basement and unlocks a cabinet to confirm that the hunting weapons are still there. He spends the rest of the day cleaning the place, but Lisa only rests. There's some food on the floor, which Dan blames on rats. He also notices that one of his sweaters is missing. Later the couple makes dinner together and Dan complains about the way Lisa chops garlic, causing another argument. Then they have their meal by the lake and Dan explains that he ordered special ingredients to make her favorite food because he wanted this dinner to be special. However, Lisa points out that steak isn't her favorite food, and they have another small argument. After dinner they play Scrabble and Lisa gets annoyed because Dan uses weird words nobody knows. After a short argument, Lisa goes to bed. Dan copes by drinking by the lake. The next morning, Dan goes around the woods putting rocks in his bag. Once it's full, he hides it in the boat. Next he takes out the tools from the trunk and gets them ready in the basement. After drinking to gain some bravery, Dan puts chloroform on a napkin and very slowly approaches Lisa. When he's about to attack, Lisa suddenly turns around and tases him in the chest, knocking him out. Moments later, Dan wakes up tied to a chair and with wet pants because he peed on himself. Lisa asks about the chloroform and Dan pretends it's cleaning fluid, but then she asks about the tools and the rocks in the boat. He tries to come up with excuses, however they sound stupid and Lisa leaves the table. When Dan tries picking up the hacksaw with his mouth, the handle comes off. Lisa comes back with a gun and loads it before pointing it at him. She theorizes that he was planning to sedate her and tie her to the rocks to make her sink in the lake, but she doesn't understand what the saw is for. Dan explains that since bodies float, he was planning to chop her off and throw the pieces in the lake with the rocks. His story would be that she wandered off into the forest and never came back. After calling the plan dumb, Lisa wants to know why he wants to kill her, so he reveals that he knows she's been cheating with him. Lisa points out that they haven't gotten naughty in 2 years, and the last time was only their hands. Dan snaps and says he stopped touching her because she always criticized everything he did, which made him feel small. He wants a wife, not to feel like he married his mom. This makes Lisa snap back, saying she wants a man and not a toddler who doesn't have their things together. She also reveals she came to this trip with a plan too. Yesterday Lisa told Rachel that Dan would be hunting this weekend, punting emphasis on how dangerous it was. Their conversation was interrupted by Henry, an old friend of Dan who spent some time in prison. The couple helped him out by paying him to do some chores. In the present, Lisa explains that she planned to make Dan take her out hunting, pretend she tripped, and shoot him by accident. Dan thinks it would have never worked because she's a bad actress and the police wouldn't have believed her. Lisa thinks they wouldn't have believed him either, so they start acting sad about each other's deaths to prove they can do it. Dan manages to cry first, so Lisa hits him in the face with the gun and considers shooting him now. At that moment Henry appears behind her, so Dan keeps repeating it's hammer time until Henry finally hits her with a hammer to knock her out. 5 days ago, Dan and Henry met in an amusement park so the noise would cover up their conversation. Henry agreed to help Dan get rid of Lisa's body for the right amount of money, so Dan explained that Lisa was insured for $100,000 and he'd give him half. Henry also asked to hang out more and a document detailing this deal, which of course Henry wouldn't give him. In the present, Lisa wakes up tied to a chair in the basement. She easily removes the tape on one arm so Henry rushes to add more. Dan wants to know why Lisa wants to kill him, so she calls him controlling, weak, and insecure. He pushed her to quit her job where she was making real money to make her focus on acting, but he wouldn't even give her a role in his movie. All she wanted was love and support, but Dan lost all their money, the car, and the house. Even if she divorced him, she'd never get away from the debt. Now Dan reacts and thinks she wants to kill him for the insurance money, ignoring all the other things she said. Henry mentions that he's getting $50,000 and Lisa tries to tell him the policy is actually for more, but Dan covers her head with a bag. As Lisa struggles to breathe, Henry points a gun at Dan and forces him to remove the bag. Lisa reveals that the policy is for $1 million and promises to give Henry half if he shoots Dan now. A desperate Dan offers even more money, so Lisa offers all of it. An argument ensues as they both keep offering things to Henry, like spending more time together. Tired of all the talking, Dan pushes Lisa and jumps on Henry to fight him for the gun. In the struggle, they shoot a jukebox and music plays while they fight. Lisa manages to remove the tape and rushes to get the gun when it falls, but Dan fights her for it. They keep spitting on each other's faces and Henry tries to calm them down, but the gun is accidentally fired and he falls dead. Lisa and Dan argue over whose fault it is and Dan realizes he has the gun now, so he hits Lisa before she runs away. Dan chases her to the kitchen and dodges a knife she throws at him. When he tries to shoot her, he's out of ammo, so he hits her with the gun to knock her down. While he reloads, Lisa stabs his foot with a knife, so Dan throws a pot in return. It breaks the window and falls outside, but it's still distracting enough for Dan to jump on Lisa and fight her for the gun. She pushes the table on his foot, so the resulting pain allows her to get the gun back. After Dan throws the knife, another chase begins. In the bedroom, Dan tackles Lisa and they fight over the gun again, this time accidentally shooting the ceiling. To their shock, they hear a scream. Suddenly the ceiling breaks and 3 people fall through, knocking the couple out. 3 days ago, Allegra, Pete and Todd escaped from prison. They ran through the woods, only stopping to camp at night. Eventually they found the cabin and easily got inside because the key was on top of the door. It was they who took clothes from the closet and ate the food, dirtying up the place. Allegra and Pete got dirty on the table while Todd watched TV right next to them. They agreed to stay in the cabin for a few days until everyone forgot about them, but when the couple arrived, they were forced to hide in the attic. Allegra wanted to kill them in their sleep, however Pete wanted to lie low. She had no choice but to relieve herself in a can. When they were bored, they played charades. The moment the couple shot at the ceiling, they hit Todd in the butt, causing him to jump around until the ceiling broke. In the present, the criminals have tied up Dan and Lisa to chairs in the basement. They've also wrapped Henry before getting rid of the body. To keep their victims dehumanized, Pete names them Ron and Hermione. He asks them if it felt good to kill Henry, but they insist it was an accident and start arguing even now. When Dan asks the criminals what they want, Pete explains that he and Todd were in prison for 7 years and Allegra was their corrections officer. Allegra and Pete fell in love, so she helped them escape. Now Pete wants some money, but he found only a few bucks in their bullets. Lisa swears they don't have more because Dan isn't good with money, and they start arguing again. Then Allegra frees Dan, saying that they'll play a game she and the other guards played in prison. 2 prisoners were thrown in the laundry room and had to struggle in a circle to see who could overpower the other first to do the naughty. The giver got cigarettes, the receiver only got done. Todd draws a circle on the basement floor and Dan is thrown into it. The men start wrestling and Dan manages to hit Todd in his gunshot wound, allowing him to run out of the circle. The criminals quickly capture him and throw him on the pool table, where they lower his pants. When Todd is about to take advantage of Dan, Pete stops him and asks about the movie poster on the wall. Dan reveals that it's the film he directed, and Pete gets very excited because he loves that movie. Pete shares that he watched it multiple times in prison and complains about the ending, so Dan explains that the executives forced him to change it. After Pete compliments Dan's directing skills, he tells Todd to go ahead. However, Todd's groin isn't waking up and he throws Dan back in the circle. Allegra gets ready to shoot him, so Lisa yells that she has $50,000 in a private account. She swears they can have it all in the morning when the bank opens. The criminals take the deal and tie the couple up for the night. Later, Allegra removes the bullet from Todd's butt. Then they make a plan to kill the couple after getting the money and to reach the border without getting caught. Pete wants to get rid of the car after killing the couple, but Allegra sees it as a personal dig and argues with him until she leaves the room. In the basement, Lisa remembers how much in love she used to be with Dan and wonders how they got here. She realizes she secretly wanted Dan to learn about her affair because she wanted him to fight for their relationship, and she apologizes. Dan doesn't answer, instead he kicks the net in the pool table to make a ball fall. Then he screams until Todd comes to the basement, and Dan tells him he has to go to the bathroom. Before untying him, Todd squeezes Dan's groin as a warning. When he guides him to the bathroom, he first removes the lid from the toilet to avoid an attack. While Dan does his thing, Todd teases a terrified Lisa with the "I'm not touching you" game. Soon Dan comes out and Todd notices that one of his feet is bare. Dan hits him with the pool ball that he's hidden in his sock to knock him out. Afterward, Dan gives Todd's knife to Lisa and sneaks upstairs, where Pete is apologizing to Allegra and she asks to get naughty again. Soon Lisa frees herself and goes upstairs as well. When Todd takes too long, Pete and Allegra go to the basement and wake him up. At that moment, Lisa runs outside and the noise alerts the criminals, who immediately come after her. The group splits to look for the couple, so Lisa takes the chance to check the car. Unfortunately, the keys aren't there, so she has to go back inside to look for them. At the same time, Todd's flashlight runs out of batteries and returns to the house too, so he catches Lisa red-handed. He makes her drop the knife and takes the boat keys before announcing that the deal is over. As Dan slowly approaches, a desperate Lisa tells Todd that she's pregnant and she didn't say anything before because Dan isn't the father. Todd doesn't believe her and is about to shoot her anyway, so Dan jumps on him and stabs him in the shoulder with a figurine. The gun falls and the resulting gunshot alerts Allegra and Pete. Then Todd punches Dan and throws the figurine at his head, making him fall. Dan reaches for the gun and Todd fights him for it, so Lisa appears behind him to bite a piece of his ear off. Todd pushes her and Dan grabs the gun, but Todd moves fast and attacks him again, disarming him before hitting him a few times and throwing him into the pantry. Todd also throws Lisa into a cabinet, so she grabs the bleach bottle and sprays his eyes. Then Lisa breaks a jar on his head and rubs his face on the broken glass before kicking him a few times. Todd catches her leg and picks her up to throw her on the table. Next he takes some cables from a lamp and starts choking her, but he stops when he sees Dan run to the gun. While the men fight again, Lisa runs to get a knife and stabs Todd in the back. His muscles are so thick that he isn't bothered at all, so Lisa grabs more knives and stabs him multiple times. When Todd finally turns around to go after her, Dan stabs his head with a figurine. Todd keeps walking and Dan rushes to get the gun, which doesn't have ammo left. Dan suddenly quotes Harry Potter before collapsing. Hearing the other criminals approaching, the couple rushes to hide upstairs. In the closet, Dan blames himself for everything, since he gave up when things started to fall apart. He gives Lisa the boat keys and tells her to leave without him to protect the baby. However, Lisa clarifies she lied to distract Todd and she isn't really pregnant. Dan admits that it was the best acting he's ever seen. When Pete is about to find them, Dan jumps out to tackle him and the couple runs away. As soon as Lisa comes out, Allegra tackles her and gets ready to shoot her, but Dan knocks her down and hurts her hip. Then Pete jumps through the window and lands on Dan, so he starts beating him up. Lisa takes the chance to stab him with a rake and tries to run, but Todd returns and captures her. Pete breaks the rake to get the handle and drags Dan by the hair, saying that killing gets boring after doing it too many times. Then he stabs Dan's hand with the broken handle. After monologuing some more, Pete turns on the lawnmower and tries to smash Dan's head into the rotating blades. Dan uses his hands to block it and ends up losing a few fingers. Suddenly the group hears music and a car runs over Pete. The driver turns out to be Michael. 6 hours ago, a neighbor was on his way to the supermarket when he saw the mess in the cabin, so he called Michael to alert him. Michael tried to leave the retirement home but a nurse stopped him, so Michael beat him up with his cane and took his car keys. It was a very modern car and he didn't know how to use the digital controls, so he didn't choose the music. He stopped at the gas station to fill up the tank and left without paying. In the present, Allegra drops the gun to check on Pete, so Michael picks it up and immediately blows up Todd's head. When Michael is about to kill Pete too, Allegra stabs him from behind, causing him to accidentally shoot her foot. Pete comes closer to mock Michael, who bites the tip of his nose off. As Pete knocks Michael down to start choking him, Michael tells his son to run. Dan and Lisa rush to get in the car, but it only works for 2 minutes before it gets stuck. Now the couple has to watch how Pete kills Michael by throwing him on the lawnmower. They try the car again and this time it does take off. However, Pete shoots at it a few times and causes it to crash into a tree. Dan tells Lisa to go to the boat while he takes care of things. Meanwhile, Allegra asks Pete for help, but instead he announces he wants to break up. When he checks the car, the couple is already gone. Allegra goes back inside to clean her foot with alcohol and bandage it. However, Dan appears to kick her leg and break it. He raises the gun and asks for his sweater, but Allegra starts begging for mercy and quickly changes to insulting him. Dan gets so annoyed that he shoots her in the face. At the pier, Lisa gets in the boat and tries to leave, but it won't start. After turning a few handles, the engine finally works, but unfortunately Pete shows up and leaves with her. Lisa yells for help and Dan runs to the pier, where he grabs the boat's rope. This pulls him into the water and drags him along. Pete is talking to Lisa about the money, so he doesn't see Dan climb on the boat. Dan smashes his head and a fight ensues. When Dan is quickly overpowered, Lisa scratches Pete's face, only to get knocked down too. While Pete keeps beating Dan up, Lisa finds the flare gun and shoots it at Pete, who easily dodges it. He takes the gun from her and knocks her down again. When he's about to shoot her, Dan threatens him, but the cool moment is ruined by his puking. Then he punches Pete and they start fighting again. Soon Pete starts choking Dan with a rope, so Lisa appears behind him to choke him with a bag handle. Pete pushes her off, but Dan takes over the bag and Lisa slashes Pete's leg. Together, the couple throws Pete into the water, and he struggles for a few seconds before the rocks in the bag make him sink. Unfortunately, the rope is tangled on both Pete's and Dan's feet, so Dan is pulled into the water too. Lisa catches him just in time and refuses to let go when he asks her to. Instead, she pulls him back onto the boat and takes off the shoe with the rope to save him. Moments later, Dan calls the police. Lisa gives him a bag with his fingers and his wedding ring. They apologize to each other for the murder attempts and Dan wonders what they should do. Lisa says it's time to confront their problems, so Dan says yes and they hold hands. When the authorities and the press finally arrive, Dan and Lisa make a big deal about the incident, crying in front of the camera. They pretend they were just a happy couple whose happy vacation was ruined by criminals and they got hurt trying to protect each other. Soon their faces are all over the media, and Michael's death is given attention to because he was a veteran. The couple appears as guests in talk shows and their story is picked up for a movie, which will be directed by Dan with Lisa as the star, but it's direct to streaming. When the movie finally comes out, fake Dan and Lisa are shown as amazing warriors who beat up the criminals. Dan finally has the power to do what he wants, and he and Lisa celebrate their success with a kiss.